Now, you might have heard the sad news this week that Professor Bill Hawkey passed away at Moruya Hospital on the weekend. Last year, ABC Sth East recorded this special interview with Bill ahead of his final concert marking his 85th birthday in recognition of Bill's significant contribution to music in Australia, his birthplace, New Zealand, and particularly within the Sth East. We'll replay that feature report for you now.
We decided that we would make this concert a thank you concert to the community for the support they had given us both over the years that we've been down here. And then I thought, well, what's a good date to put on? I thought, well, St Cecilia, the patron saint of music, she's been with me since I started my musical career, tapping me on the head and saying, keep going, you're doing reasonably well. So I thought, yeah, November the 22nd, St Cecilia's Day, 85th birthday celebration, and thank you to the community. I grew up in a small town in New Zealand called Timaru, about 100 miles south of Christchurch. And my father was a wonderful pianist, amateur but incredible pianist, and an amazing sense of harmonic structure. He could sit down with any melody and improvise. And you had all these beautiful harmony. It was intuitive. He just had an innate ability to be able to do this. But he was also very much involved in the brass band movement, as was my grandfather, as were some of his brothers. And so there was piano, there was the brass instrument, but my father also used to have at-home gigs. And he had a fellow with a xylophone, a fellow with drums, a fellow with a banjo, a singer, and this was going on in home. My mother she had a lovely voice, but she would poo-poo any notion that she had any contribution to make, but she did. She was there, and you just couldn't escape it. Dad was very encouraging. He gave me my first piano lessons, and then he sent me on to another piano teacher in Timaru.
What did he teach you?
Well, he taught me very much what technique was about. He made sure that I understood. He was very keen on scales, very keen. And I can remember even in my early teens, and he'd say, have you done your scales today? And anyway, I eventually learned, because I was an avid reader, I loved to read, still do. I learned that if I put the book I was reading on the rack of the piano, I could sit there and I could play scales flat out, up and down, and while I was reading the book. And Dad would say, oh, scales are going so well, your technique's developing it all the time. Not realising, of course, that I was filling in time reading books that I thoroughly enjoyed and just doing that to keep my father happy. It was a bit naughty, really, but look, he taught me, and he also introduced me to the classics as far as music was concerned. Early Mozart, early Haydn, some early Chopin, stuff from the preludes, and he was a good teacher. He got to the stage, he said, Bill, I think it's time that you went to another private teacher. And so he introduced me to another teacher who was the best in Timaru at that time. When I reached the age of about 18, she said, I've taught you as much as I think I can, but there's a wonderful teacher who's probably the best teacher in New Zealand in Christchurch. I think you should see if you could get lessons from him. Well, at that time, I was a high school dropout. I hadn't done well at high school. There are good reasons for that, but that doesn't matter. So I got hold of this music teacher in Christchurch, and I said, if I was able to come to Christchurch, would you be able to fit me in and teach me the piano? And he said, yes. So I was working for my father at that time. My father had a grocery business. So he and I had an arrangement whereby every Wednesday I would get on the bus and bus to Christchurch and have my 1 hour lesson and then bus back to Timaru. And when I was just at the end of my 19th year, this teacher said, we're not having a lesson today. I've made an appointment for you to go down and have an interview with the professor of music at the University of Canterbury because you're wasting your time as a grocer. So I said, yes, okay. So I went down and met with this wonderful professor of music called Vernon Griffiths. And he talked to me a lot. And he said, well, you know, you can come in here when you're 21 and you can undertake the first course of study, and if you're successful at the end of it when you're 21, you're granted admission as a university admission equivalent. Anyway, I said to my parents, this is risky, because I said I didn't do well at school, and I think I'd like to go up when I'm 20 and do 1 year of the whole course and just see if I can cope. And if I can't cope, I'll come back and be a grocer and an amateur musician. So I went up at the age of 20 and I had a ball. Christchurch was such an alive city as far as music making was concerned, and you had the cathedral with the most wonderful pipe organ, because I was already learning pipe organ in Timaru as well as piano. And so, look, from that point on, Bill, the doors are opened. And it's been a succession of opening doors and opening doors all the way through. Everything just kept rolling. And then for 6 years after I graduated, I was on the staff at the School of Music for Boys, Presbyterian College for Boys in Christchurch, and then I was appointed back to the university as a lecturer in music. And then I was eventually, after 14 years there, I was headhunted for a position in Adelaide to set up a school of performing arts and dance, drama and music. And then 3 years later, the Canberra School of Music advertised for its first deputy director, because Ernest Llewellyn, the founder of the school, was about to retire and they needed somebody to start taking over the ropes. And I continued as deputy director under 2 or 3 directors, and then eventually 3 or 4 years before I retired, I became the director. So it's been an incredible procession of opportunities. There are 2 languages. There's the language we speak, and there's the language of music. And sometimes music speaks more strongly than words. And if, for example, I go back to where we started with the concert last week, I could talk to you for an hour and a quarter, and you would get bored to the eyeballs. But I would like to think that I could sit down and play for you for an hour and a quarter and hopefully enrich both our lives through what music has to say as a language. I mentioned that I was a high school dropout, and there was a good reason for that, and that is that I understood, as I understand it. My parents, during the war years, moved from Timaru to Invercargill when I was close to finishing my primary school. And the education system in Southland at Invercargill was totally different to the one I'd left in Timaru. But then 2 years later, for absolutely justifiable circumstances, they moved back to Timaru. And at that point, I was in my first year at high school, and the education system was completely different to that which I'd had in the first 2 terms at Southland Boys High, totally different. There were no counsellors, there was no encouragement, there was bullying if you didn't cope, and in the end I just despaired. I wasn't coping, but nobody was there to help me cope. And I just said to my parents, I think I can do better with music. But that was purely music as a hobby, but a most enjoyable hobby, and working in a daytime job, but keeping my music. So I was learning both piano and pipe organ at that time and doing well, but school was a no-no. So yes, there is something I want to say. If you don't succeed in some aspects of life, you can succeed in others. And I didn't succeed very well as an academic, but I ended up as a high school dropout as a professor and director of music at the Australian National University. That's not a bad transformation.
Not bad at all. Bill Hawkey, valet. That report produced last year by the ABC's Bill Brown.